both AirVenture and also the NAFI annual conference for CFIs called NAFI Summit. You're obviously very well invited to attend that. You can find that online. We found these DP panels extremely valuable. People really raved about the opportunity to speak one-on-one with the DPE. So we've been thinking of how to expand that to a broader audience. And here we are. The FAA very nicely is supporting us for this debut performance. So what we're doing is we had CFIs pre-submit questions, so we have time to research and put together a nice, distinct responses to these for you, but we're always looking to gather more questions. So please put those in the chat because those can inform future DPE roundtables. And if you find this valuable, certainly include that in the comments as well, because we would love to continue having this, if possible, on the pro tips to reach a broad audience. Okay, having said that, let's tuck right into what we're doing this evening. So here's the three of us, happy smiling faces for you. Jurg's already introduced them. So let's dive right into those questions. So we know this is all about safety because really underlying all of the airman certification requirements, the standards, is really driven by safety, isn't it? So these are unfiltered questions as they were submitted by CFIs, okay? And that's what we're going to do. We'll start off with Mary dealing with this question about the commercial rating. Mary?
Hi there. Hey, the question that was sent in is for the commercial rating. It's requiring 10 hours of underhood time. And the question is, well, doesn't the IFR rating cover this requirement? And why are some DPEs asking for additional documentation to prove this fact? And what documentation is required? And we'll show you that specifically here on the next slide. But it's interesting because previous to a few years ago, this hardly ever came up. And part of the reason I think that it hardly ever came up was because we were documenting our logbook so carefully that during the instrument training, we showed those areas that are included at the bottom of this slide that Karen highlighted in yellow. And under the 61-129A3I, talks about the 10 hours, and then it goes into specifically what that means. And this is under a view limiting device of some kind, and it includes instrument flying, attitude instrument flying, basic instruments, partial panel skills, recovery from unusual attitudes, and intercepting and tracking navigational systems. And it says 5 of the 10 hours have to be in a single engine airplane. Well, I think in the past, we always documented our logbooks perhaps better than what I've been seeing over the last few years, because those pieces are being left out. And it's a requirement that we log those all flight and ground training for our students that we've given. And so these need to show up. And that's why people are asking for them. So if you're working with a student and you're a double I and you're training them in an instrument rating, be sure and put in these pieces that will be looked for in the commercial. If you put a little star next to them, because they are required. And it's sure a bummer to send somebody out to do 10 more hours of training, including those things, because their instructor didn't do it and now he's off to the airline and can't be found. So don't be one of those people.
Thank you, Mary.
Back to you, Karen.
Right. So the bottom line is, even though, as we know, all of this area would have been covered during the instrument training, we can't just make the assumption. We have to see this logged because remember, you don't need an instrument rating to go for your commercial rating. So DPs should be reviewing to make certain this does appear in a logbook. So just please be thorough if you're CFI. Next question. This is for you, Frank. And
Frank, you are muted.
You are muted.
The real ID requirement came from a TSA requirement for states to issue what they call the now real ID effective May 7th, 2025. And in my case, where I live in Florida, what it meant is they put a hologram on it and a gold star. And this is a TSA requirement. As you know, an ID for any type of check ride is a government issued ID. As far as I'm concerned, a person with a driver's license that is issued by the state is satisfactory, although other operations are requiring a real ID. So this is an issue that has to be addressed by people other than myself.
Okay, so right now we determined there's not a definitive answer that's being applied nationally. So bottom line is if you have someone who's approaching their examination, they should be able to get in touch with the examiner and ask the examiner if a real ID is required. And that examiner can check with their managing specialist to confirm, because we have heard that in some FSDO areas they are being required, but not necessarily all. So it's best to be cautious about this, and until there's some national guidance that's been clarified, hopefully in the very near future, best to take that on for the PIC and ask that question. Frank, this is also you. Here's a little meatier question for you.
Okay. So here we have an issue where DP has failed an applicant for not performing maneuvers within their standards, even though they're within ACS standards. Well, the issue should stop at one point, because there's only one standard, and that's the airplane flying handbook. And both the DPE and the applicant should be aware of what those standards are. Obviously, the performance standards are in the ACS. So this is an issue greater than the maneuver, in my opinion. This is an issue with the DPE, which has to be directly addressed. Now, we have a problem in the other questions about people afraid to confront the DPE because we have some type of blackmail list out there. The fact of the matter is none of the list like that doesn't exist. So my approach would be to approach the DPE, point out where it is, Chapter 7 in the Airplane Flying Handbook, show him the ACS, and come to a common agreement.
And now, in this particular maneuver, let's talk just a little bit more about this. And again, this is the unfiltered CFIs question, and they said this DP is requiring at least a 30-degree bank, and the CFI said it's not specified in their airplane flying handbook, says this maneuver does not require the turn to be completed as constant radius. So a quick note on that is constant radius in the AFF, in the airplane flying handbook, refers to wind drift corrections. It's not referring to a bank angle. And this is the quote right from it: since this maneuver does not require the turn to be completed as a constant radius, the pilot does not need to apply drift correction to complete the turn. Because as we know, maintaining a certain bank angle wouldn't result in a constant radius unless you're in a no wind condition, which is extremely rare.
And Karen, on page 717, ADOM pylons are performed at bank angles ranging from shallow to steep.
Right, and
So that,
right. The next page, you'll actually see a diagram of that. Quick note on this one. When we think about the bank angle, the Airplane Flying Handbook does note that the distance between the pylons should allow for the straight and level portion to be 3 to 5 seconds. So obviously that holds some implications for how rapidly you're turning around the points, because remember, once those wings are leveled, they should only be leveled for 3 to 5 seconds. So if someone's doing a very, very shallow bank in light wind conditions, they're going to be pretty far away from those pylons, and that would likely end up being a fairly lengthy straight and level period between those pylons. So just a consideration. Sometimes I find people are choosing their pylons way too far apart, sometimes way too close together. And this is right from the Airplane Filing Handbook, the one that Frank was just noting. That actually shows this. It says bank angles ranging from shallow to steep, but the diagram itself, and remember, all of the ACS refer back to the references that underline those standards. So this is the reference on this. So it shows bank angles from 30 to 60 degrees, and it also suggests that the instructor should increase the complexity of the maneuver as part of the training proficiency. That's obviously not in the standard, but looking at this, it just provides some guidance about what might be anticipated based on the AFH. Okay, and we really can't speak to bank angles from shallow to steep because typically a shallow bank would be less than 30 degrees. This is just referencing what is in the airplane flying handbook. Frank, did you want to say anything else on that?
Well, we have to remember it's an eye reference on a ground point with
Mhm,
changing ground speeds, right? So
mhm.
altitudes are changing. And that's really the purpose of the maneuver.
Right. So there's a number of things that the DPE is looking at, but telling someone to maintain exactly a specific bank angle throughout the entire maneuver is not necessarily in the standards. Okay. Next question is, this one is for, uh, this one's for Mary.
Okay, well, this one kind of follows along in that
Mhm,
same pattern
mhm. Yes.
of, as DPEs, we are supposed to be testing to the standards, and it's not about techniques because everybody has one, and we're not evaluating somebody's technique, but we also can't make up our own standards and what we expect to be happening, and I'd be interested to know if these people were actually failed, if they were disapproved for doing what is talked about here of a
Mhm.
different gliding speed during the steep spiral, for instance, and the bank angle. And so, the conclusion on this would be interesting to know how to deal with it. But in general, we have a boss, and that boss is a managing specialist, is DPEs, and we're required to operate within a certain set of standards of integrity and professionalism. And any applicant that doesn't feel that that's the case has the right to take that to the FAA and create some type of feedback on that. And I think you have a slide about how to do that, right? About how to,
Right, right.
yeah.
You can see, and it's obviously very real, and every DP is a CFI also. So, we know where these questions are coming from, a fear of being blacklisted or reluctance to question. This was yet another example, by the way, from another person, and I did follow up with this one individually because I was so surprised at what the question said. A private pilot applicant to demonstrate commercial pilot tasks exactly spelled in commercial ATS, and the CFI confirmed to me that the DPA actually stated this, that private pilot applicants are expected to perform steep spirals to commercial standards. Well, I think we'd all agree that's a problem because it's not it's not integrated in the private pilot standards. Also, as we can see, another CFI asked more specifically, how do you get in touch with the FSDO when there are exam issues or DP issues? And unfortunately, their FSDO rep said, don't try calling him. He's a month behind in answering emails. And I'm sure many, safety investigators and managing specialists could appreciate that comment. However, this is what we are recommending. Okay, you have two avenues you can use, and you can use both if you want. Right on the designee management homepage, okay, look in the top right corner. It's right there. You'll find a link to report designee misconduct. So you can go right to that. You can file a report. Alternatively, or in addition, if you'd like, you could go to the FAA hotline. So the FAA hotline has a page at which you can mail in a report, you can actually put a telephone report or file a report online. And as you can see right in the center of this, incidents of alleged misconduct by a designee that casts doubt on the designee's judgment, integrity, or character. The FAA is designees are representing the FAA. The FAA does not want bad characters out there in the examination system. So please, if you have these issues, as a first step, try talking to the DPE, but you can always file these reports online as well.
The
Karen, I
other
would
thing
add,
too, go
Yes.
ahead.
like that, talk to the DP. I mean, try to keep it in-house if they're getting no results, and talk to his managing specialist. If no results there, then I talk to the FSDO manager. And if no results there, you work through the chain of command.
Mhm.
Then obviously I would go to what you presented. I mean, if there are rogue DPs out there, they need to be cleaned out of the system. We're all supposed to be working to one standard.
Right.
And also with that too, if there's somebody who's concerned about being blacklisted, my understanding is that this report, the hotline report, can be anonymous. So, if that helps, but I couldn't agree more with Frank and Karen. We really need to police bad behavior, because we're trying to improve safety, and we're trying to get pilots on their pathway toward a career and whatever else they want to do. And so it's not about our standards, it's about the FAA standards of safety to do that. And we're supposed to be upholding those.
Right. Yep. And I didn't want to imply leap straight into filing. Frank's, if you would, the chain of command, the sequence makes perfect sense. If you can talk to the DPE, just very objectively and just question, for example, say, like, what would you like to see with this maneuver? I can tell you as DPEs, we're happy to discuss things. A big part of what we do is educational. And we'd so much rather have people come in and have a very good idea of what we're looking for and not trying to guess. So if there's any questions about what's anticipated of a maneuver, or remember, they're all experienced CFIs looking for, you can just say, do you have any suggestions on how I could teach this particular maneuver? So just suggestions for you to consider.
Excuse me, my apologies for interrupting, but there's some background noise among the three of you. Someone has a TV on or something that's noisy, and I'm getting a lot of comments that it's very distracting. So if you could address that, our audience would appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So whoever that is, if you could just perhaps mute or unmute when you're not talking, that would be very helpful. Okay, back to you, Frank. I'm sure we'll all chime in on this one.
I'm sorry to see this comment, because obviously a DP is also a servant. And this is just rude behavior, not returning calls, text messages, or emails.
Mhm.
I would, in this particular case, yes, DPs are busy, but that's not an excuse. Sometimes it takes me the next day to get back to an applicant when he either calls me or texts me or emails me. But it should be our job as DPs, it is our job to respond. The interesting thing about this is I would email, text the DPE and see what type of response you get. And just like we previously talked about, there is a chain of command in-house. If the DP ignores you, give him a couple of days. I'd go to his managing specialist and say, I can't reach this individual. And then I'd go to the manager of the FSDO.
Thank you, Frank. And Mary, do you have any comments to add?
I do, and I like Frank. This is just sickening to me that people are not getting responses. I mean, what does it take to answer an email with "I'd love to help you, but I'm booked for 2 months" or whatever, And I've had people tell me that I was the only person that answered them out of 130 people they tried. And these are often CFI applicants who've waited a long time for an initial test. So, I have no explanation for it, and I don't understand it. And yes, move that along to and that could go into the hotline too. That you're not getting responses from DPEs. Part of the problem, however, I've heard from some of them is that they're trying to contact DPEs that are no longer DPEs. they have retired, or they don't have their designation anymore. And so we kind of need to work through the DMS to make sure that whoever's on there is actually someone valid to do this.
And Karen,
Can I answer that question on behalf of the FSDO? That is part of the oversight. And to me, that FAA.gov website, taking a look at it, that should be something that continuously should be monitored. If the DP changes their phone number, email address, etc. So if you do find that, just let the local FSDO know, and it will be changed immediately, guaranteed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jörg. And just mentioning, I'm probably the worst culprit of this group, certainly by far, because with still a very active instructor and lots of roles on various national boards, committees, working groups, I can easily get well over 100 emails a day. So I will have to admit that sometimes responding does lag, and I really apologize to people. I get to them, but not always within 2 days, because they really pile up very quickly. I wanted to make a quick note on this. A change that is occurring in the oversight of DPEs is right now we have a bit of a hybrid system where it's transitioning from primarily, as it has been for decades, FSDO oversight of individual designees to more of a national system. What has happened, or the way it's organized, is the FSDOs have a person assigned as the managing specialist over the DPEs. That's on top of all of their other work. And that's a big burden on that person. So what they're doing is transitioning to a national program where there'll be people whose entire job is managing a group of DPEs. And so this will be a regional model where people that have worked with the FSDO, my understanding is those are the people that are being selected to be the regional people with that as their sole responsibility. And then they may be managing, perhaps I heard the average would be about 35 DPEs. Now, there's obviously pros and possibly cons to this, but what we're anticipating is with the very strong oversight of one individual over a number of DPEs, we expect to see more standardization, more communication between the DPEs, so that there is more consistency in exams. And then hopefully in these kind of cases, everyone can be really looked at more closely and focus put on this. I think what's happening with some DPEs is if they feel that they're just not available, they're simply not answering, with an assumption that the person's then realizing lack of response means that they're not available. So clearly that is something that has to change, and we really are empathetic with you for that situation. Okay. Oh, Frank, here's a softball for you.
this is a soft one. Thank you, Karen. As far as lamination, if we look at the Order 8900.1, Chapter 1, and they have addressed that issue at the end of that chapter as a note, and it says airmen may either use clear laminating sheets to protect permanent FAA issued certificates or have the certificates professionally laminated. And as long as the airman's signature is on a certificate where it's laminated is readable. So yes, you can laminate.
Okay.
In fact, they encourage it because they don't want the paper to dissolve in your wallet.
Right. And just make sure, of course, that you have both sides of it.
Right. You have the signature on the inside, not the outside of the laminate.
Right. Okay. Okay, so we had a CFI write in about forward slips. This is one I'm going to talk about initially because there's been a lot of issues with and misunderstandings with forward slips. So, you can read yourself what the CFI wrote, that they know of only one human I don't think monkeys are teaching, but if they know of only one human that teaches a slip all the way to landing, the assumption is that instructors and DPs support their method, which I assume is not slipping to the landing. And by the way, that is what it's called, forward slip to landing in the ACS. So then there's a series of questions for DPs. Would we agree for that purpose to correct a high glide path? What is the expectation of DPEs about slipping with flaps? Okay, that's also a question about should it be no flaps, and what if they add flaps after you're removing the slip? Is that considered to be unstable? Okay, so the underlying question of all of this is really, what are the expectations for forward slip to landing, right? Okay, so as we know, ACS is built on knowledge, risk management, and skills. So if we look at what it says about knowledge, this is right from the airplane flying manual. So, I'm sorry, airplane flying handbook. So it tells us about the answers to all these things. Intentional slips, what is the knowledge we're expected to know? What is the purpose of a forward slip? Well, it says right here. They're useful in forced landing situations where you have to clear obstacles during approaches to confined areas. Okay. Also points out in a real emergency why this is an important skill set to have as a technique for a better outcome. And the value of the maneuver, this is right from the AFH, the value of the maneuver at the bottom explains its inclusion as a task. So right there, you've got the knowledge to answer the question, what is the purpose of the forward slip, which is in one of the knowledge areas, okay? What about risk management? This is what it says. Risk management, the applicant should be able to identify, assess, and mitigate risk associated with forward slip operations, including fuel flowage, tail saws with flaps, and airspeed control. Here's the answer to all of those right in the airplane flying handbook. Okay, airspeed indicators may have considerable error in that. Some airplanes have limitations. Now, talking about the DPE expectations, the DPE expectations would be that the applicant is familiar with the guidance in the AFM or the POH for that specific airplane, that they should know whether or not there's limitations relating to slips with flap extended and comply with that. Okay. It also talks about, as you can see, risk management, including fuel flowage. So that's also covered in the AFH. So here's your specific reference guidance to answer those two items. Now, what about the skill area? Okay. When demonstrating it, the pilot plans the descent, such as a forward slip may be used on final approach. Okay. Important point, the last two sentences. Once established, the height above ground should be sufficient to allow the pilot to use a forward slip and establish a suitable approach path to the runway aiming point at the appropriate time. So when do you come out of the slip? When the round out begins. The pilot removes the forward slip and transitions to a normal landing. I don't know how it could be more clear than that. It's called a forward slip to a landing. It doesn't mean that you start out 300 feet high on final, you slip down 300 feet, you come out of it hundreds of feet above your aiming point, and then you continue to a normal landing. It is a forward slip to a landing because it's an important skill that may be used and necessary in certain circumstances. So hopefully that does answer all those questions. The DPE's expectations are that the pilot has the knowledge, risk management, and skills to meet the ACS. And the ACS is built upon this reference guidance. So it's all there. And by the way, on a broader basis, feel free and please encourage all your applicants and yourself to go back and review this reference guidance if there's any questions at all about what the expectations are. Okay, Frank or Mary, did you have anything to add to that?
I really like what you said, Karen. And I think too, the emphasis on this is to a landing. This is not something we're doing as part of a power off 180 where we might slip first, add flaps and so on. This is actually probably our flaps are not operative. We maybe have had an emergency that involved electrical. We don't have flaps, but we still need to come down over some tall trees to make a forced landing, off the airport somewhere. And so this is one of those things where you're going to bring it down to the ground in the slip. And the wind has a lot to do with your choice on that. So again, it's to the landing. It's not just a piece of this to lose some altitude to get on the glide slope.
Right. I found there seems to be, for some reason, so much misunderstanding about this that I include the specific discussion of this in the pre-exam information I send out to people. So it is a forward slip to landing. It is not lose a little bit of altitude and then come out and continue at length, put in your flaps, and then go and land. If you have time to put in the flaps when you're in the roundout, that might cause some instability. I would agree with that one. Frank, I don't know if you want to add anything to this.
Frank, you're muted.
Thank you. I'd like to add that manufacturers do not test in Part 23 slip in aircraft with flaps. Obviously, in the old days, you didn't have flaps. Slip was the way to lose altitude. Now you have flaps. You should use flaps properly. When you do a slip with flaps, you don't know what you're doing to the airflow over your tail section. So consequently, it's too variable of a maneuver, too risky to just go and do slips with flaps down. That's why you don't find that addressed in most POHs. For instance, my old Cessna will allow 10 degrees, and that's it. But most of the time, you won't see limits because you don't say it's not in there, therefore we can do it. No, you have to say because it's not in there, you don't do it. One of the alarming statistics I find is 20% of stall spin accidents occur on an engine failure. Now, why would that be? Usually someone's trying to stretch a glide or they overshot. And what I propose or what I imagine is they put in flaps, they're overshooting, and they do a slip and they blanket the tail. So you either slip the aircraft with no flaps or you use flaps.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Okay, next question is for Mary.
Oh, this is one of my favorites. I don't have a good answer for this one. I have seen many variations on a theme. This is the one about full name, middle initial, full name, full middle name, full name, lots of middle names, and which of our FAA documents must we have all of those on? IACRA has the full, first, middle, and last full name, but which other documents have to match that seems to change in my experience. And so I would like to get the FAA intervention on this one and see if Jared would like to shed a little light on this one that's a little more definitive.
Well, first of all, the student pilot certificate, when they made their application, we want to make sure that all of these documents match. So to me, when people start looking at their driver's license and there's just the middle initial versus where they had the full middle name on the pilot certificate for their private pilot check ride, and now they're going for a commercial check ride and they're just putting the middle initial. That's not what we want. We want what they first made application with. And if they want to change that, they can come to the FSDO and get a name change and have taken care of it with the FSDO personnel. I don't personally handle this, but in the past, when I was an inspector, that's how we handled those situations. So we want them to match entirely. For example, I do not have a middle name. So mine would be Jörg N.A. Grossenbacher. I do not have a middle name. So that would be an example of it. Now, what I did as a student pilot right from the start, it's Jörg Grossenbacher, nothing in there. And that's acceptable. Otherwise, I'd be in trouble with all the type rides and everything that I've had to do in the past. So that's how we work with it. However, like you said, I've seen it all, just like you were talking about. And a lot of our DPs send the applicants back to the FSDO to make sure that this gets corrected. I hope that answers your question, Mary.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've run across it too with Oklahoma City, whether the medical seems to be one that doesn't matter as much
Right.
as, for instance, the knowledge test has to have the same name and it has to match some original document, passport or driver's license or some government issued ID. I guess the concern that this question has too is the state the state of Massachusetts, it appears, only issues with the first name and a middle initial and a last name and no full middle name. So if the IACRA is expecting the full thing, and obviously you don't have a middle name, so that is the full thing, then can they use the driver's license with just the middle initial? And the answer must be no, right? Unless they have the FESDO approval.
Yeah, I mean, to me, you can certainly grab another form of ID, whether it's your passport showing the full name.
Mm-hmm.
That's another government issued ID, like Frank was saying before with the real ID now being out there. That
Mm-hmm.
to me, the passport is an excellent document, and birth certificate, same thing, has the full name with the
Mm-hmm.
middle name in there. So my point being is I would be going to make sure that if you do have a discrepancy, go to the FISDO, and I know they'd be more than happy to make sure that it's in line for all your documentation. And especially when people get married, they need to change that. They come in for a name change, or they go and see a DP to get it done as well. We have DPs doing that kind of work as well. That I recall that was one of the changes just lately.
Okay, thank you. So we don't know
Thanks.
specifically what Massachusetts is doing, but I think similar to the real ID, if there's any question at all, allow enough lead time to be able to reach out to the examiner in advance. You can always send text photos of whatever documentation you have ask them, and they could check with their managing specialist if necessary.
Correct.
Okay. Last thing you want to do is show up at an exam and be sent away. Okay. No one wants that. Okay, Frank, this one's for you.
Okay, once again, let's see. The DP is requesting a full landing stall, fully developed or first indication well. What does the ACS tell us? ACS tells us applicant should notify us at the point of impending stall and then complete a full stall. So the ACS is our reference.
Yeah, so there's no option for DP for
Right.
private.
Once again, sit down with all these issues with these DPs, Karen, I think can be resolved by CFIs and flight schools having relationships with their DPEs. Just like Long said before, I won't work with a flight instructor or a school unless I know them, because all these schools now make their own flight operation manuals. I want to check those to see they're in accordance with the airplane flying handbook. A lot of times 2-3 maneuvers aren't. So we have a fundamental problem. How can we as DPs change the way we do things when the FAA has public documentation? So having a relationship with a DP, you should be able to sit down with him and discuss this, not find out when the poor applicant comes for the check ride. So
Right.
the DP is not acting in accordance with the ACS.
Right. And we probably all, I'm certain that we've all run into the case where a private pilot applicant comes and you feel the buffet, they say stall, and they put the nose down, and
Right.
the plane hadn't had a full stall. It's clearly in the ACS. Sometimes it's it's during their exam. It's the first time they've ever done a full stall, and that is not a comfortable spot for them to be in.
Well, that's a problem with the CFI, which we can address later on.
Right. Giving you a little bonus answer on this, because one of the areas that tends to sometimes be unclear, apparently, to instructors is the commercial standards. Okay. So I thought I would add in what the commercial standards are, because it seems very common that there's an assumption that all of the commercial applicants only have to recover at an impending stall. That is not the case. Okay, so here's your quotes right from the ACS for commercial. Power off stalls, these are the skill requirements. Notice that the evaluator for power off stall specifies the configuration. They could say how many degree of flaps they want, for example. They can ask for a turning flight. I find very few people apparently ever really practice that. So it's a good thing to make sure that applicants are ready because it could be requested. And again, it's either an impending or a full stall as specified by the evaluator. So the evaluator should always indicate so there's no question at all when they want to see the recovery. And it says again in skill 8, recover at the first indication of a stall or after full stall as specified by the evaluator. So for commercial pilots, and by the way, this applies to the private only, that would be definitely the full stall recovery. Power on also, I found many commercial applicants, if I ask for a full stall power on, I find out they have not done that since their private training. So be ready for that as far as preparing people for the commercial as well.
Karen, you made a good point about the turn. When I ask an applicant to do that, they look at me and say, I've never done that before.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep, it happens. And notice not to exceed 20 degrees. So what people can struggle with if they're not ready for that is the turning tendency of the aircraft. As it slows down, it's going to want to create more of a bank. And I found lots of times people aren't ready for that because they have not done it. So it doesn't take much practice to be ready for that, but it avoids surprises on exam day. Accelerated stalls, I think that's pretty clear for everyone, but again, the evaluator can determine how they want the plane configured, and they have to, again, recover at an impending stall.
Karen, I like to add a point to that. Most
Yeah.
operators, they think the word accelerated means airspeed instead of G loading.
Mhm.
And most of them, for some reason, I don't know where they get this from, prior to starting the maneuver, they reduce their power to slow down,
Yeah.
enter it, whereas the book says from cruising flight. So they never generate enough energy, obviously, to generate a G, but they're
Mhm.
not even performing the maneuver correctly. I mean, I find this almost across the board, and that's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay, thank you. And yep, I'm sure
May,
Mary and I both agree with you as well. So thank you for mentioning that. Okay,
may I
that's
add one more
helpful.
thing to Karen, to
Yes.
this? This is probably one of the most misunderstood pieces of the ACS, and people need to realize that these all change. What you did as a student is maybe not what is happening now in terms of the ACS requirements. So we really need to read these. We really need to read them more than once every 2 years, because you're training your students to do what's required on this test. And if they've never done it, that reflects very poorly on you. And if the students can't do it or won't even try it, I mean, that's just really unfortunate. So we need to make sure that we understand these and we practice them. And they took out just impending or first indication because, like you were saying, people would recover and bounce you off the roof, and you hadn't even come close to a full stall. The other thing to think about too is private pilot requires a full stall. If you're doing a private pilot certificate in a multi-engineer plane, guess what? It's a
Mhm.
full stall. So keep that in mind. And whether you enjoy that or not, or the DPE does that, that's what the ACS says. So it's potluck for the evaluator. And so prepare for all of it, and that's the point of it. They changed it to include those so that we as instructors would train more fully on these for more safety.
Right. Also, hopefully, I know there's obviously gouges out for instructors, but I'm sorry, for examiners, but hopefully examiners are switching this up enough. So it's not like this is exactly what's going to happen on your exam.
Mm-hmm.
We do have to prepare a customized plan of actions for every examination. Um, so it's not just ending up being teaching for only some of the knowledge or some of the risk management items, and not being fully prepared for the various types of requests that they may get during the flying portion as well.
Karen, I'd like to add that 80% of all stall spin accidents happen from a power on stall. Yet the flight training community almost keeps their hands off on doing it. Like, let's just do the maneuver, get it over with. We really, truly don't stress that maneuver enough.
Yep, I think there's perhaps some fear of it there. If you feel uncomfortable with it, start at a higher altitude. And if you start to get an incipient spin, well, you learn more about recovering from incipient spin. So if you get into a full spin, well, then hopefully you should have the altitude to recover from that.
And the other thing on that, Karen, if I might add, most
Yes.
people treat it as an acrobatic maneuver where they put the nose so high up. The
Mhm.
reality is right now, 50% of stall spin accidents or traffic pattern are takeoff, which absolutely amaze me. So really, you don't want an acrobatic maneuver. You want a subtle maneuver where he can feel the cues, he can hear the airspeed, he can feel the aircraft. So he develops that sense that a stall is impending.
Right. Also, one of the things I find lacking quite a bit in all the entire stall series is the applicant is supposed to acknowledge the signs of the impending stall. Well, what does that mean? Verbalize, you know? So they
Good
should
point.
be stating out loud. It's part of the recognition that a stall is approaching. And it's
Good
right in the
point.
ACS. Okay. I don't know any DPs that failed someone because they didn't acknowledge signs of the impending stall, but it is something that we would like to hear. All right. Now, hopefully you've already picked up the idea that we're all a team and we're all really hoping for great success, and no one is happy with long exam wait times. Okay, it means people are spending a lot of excessive money trying to keep their skills up for an exam. Question was, what's going on and what's being done about it, and what are the feelings regarding the required wait time to book a check ride? Well, the feelings are no one, none of us, you, the FAA, the examiners are happy with having people wait an excessive amount for a check ride. So question is, what's going on and what might be causing this? There's actually a lot of factors that end up filtering in. So you can't just say, we love to say it's a shortage of DPEs. And question is it really? Because I did a little analysis of, just my overall history as a DP, which is 5.5 years now. And I found that 27% of the exams I've scheduled didn't occur. In the last year, 40% of the exams I scheduled didn't occur. For those of you interested in being a DPE, realize that there's not a direct correlation between booking an exam and the hours you spend preparing for it and having actually given the exam and being paid for it. So I spend a lot of time that is just preparation for things that don't occur. So what's going on with that? Well, we still have a significant problem with people coming and not having met the qualification requirements. Either there's things missing the logbooks, or there's something found with the aircraft, or it's just the people have not technically met the qualifications. The sad case where we find that they've done 10 night landings, but technically 9 night takeoffs. Um, so sometimes people just have to go home and fly more. Um, so also, and Frank will certainly speak to this, unfortunately, pass rates have been plummeting. Okay. And I'm using that word because I feel very strongly about this. I spent close to an hour and a half talking to someone last week with the FAA who's investigating this and will be getting the corrected, up-to-date information. But it appears that at this point, the pass rate for initial private pilots, as an example, is probably in the low 60%. Now, if we think about that, after their training, a CFI wrote an endorsement. The endorsement said this person is ready to successfully pass that exam. The CFI really felt they were ready. So why are more than a third of them not successful? There's something missing there, isn't there? So what does that mean? That means there's a lot of reexaminations that are taking a lot of examination time that hopefully, if people were better prepared and ready to be successful, wouldn't have happened. No one wins when there's an exam failure. So that, unfortunately, is one of the clogs in the system. The FAA is addressing the number of DPEs. They actually increased it by 15% between 2023 and 2024, but at the same time, there were retirements, resignations, and some terminations because, as we said earlier, the FAA, no one wants rogue DPEs, so some people do get terminated for cause as well. So that does open up opportunities for new DPEs. We also have the FAA has doubled the training, the amount of training programs that they're running annually for DPEs. They've also stopped allowing people to take that training unless they've been asked to serve and identified as a DPE candidate. Prior to that, for example, I took my training, anyone could take it. Half the people in the training course hadn't even completed, they hadn't been selected to be a DPE. They were just there to see what it might be like. So the FAA's really focused that training on those people that will be serving as DPEs. So there's a lot of things being done. There's also a new proposal to allow Part 141 schools to provide examination services that we don't know at all what the final form will be. That may be issued much later this year and come into place sometime. Also, this national oversight program I spoke about earlier, one of the stated goals of that would be to review the need for DPEs on a larger level and then decide the areas that need more to be servicing that area. Right now, one of the issues is that to add DPEs to FSDO is that there both has to be a need and the ability for the FSDO to manage more people. And as I already mentioned, with a person, the individual being the managing specialist, also needing to do other jobs as well as overseeing all of the DPEs, that maybe more than one person can take on as far as adding more DPEs. So there's a lot of different factors. Something that would obviously help in addition to what the FAA is addressing would be applicants that really come in better prepared. So, if that would significantly reduce the number of people that are booking exams. Now, I know that both Frank and Mary have comments on this. So, Frank, would you like to make any comments?
Yes, as you know, I state we have enough DPs. We don't have enough flight schools or flight instructors that are doing their job properly. And what's very interesting, an article on the FAA safety briefing back in June 21st, 2024. In that article, at the national level, the FAA looked at this and found out that 50,000 practical tests were ended before the exam started. That's 50,000. That is more than enough to cover the shortage of DPs, which I don't believe we have. In my case, like you, I have a 40 to 45% no start rate. Even had one today where the applicant just was not prepared, or their logbooks weren't prepared, or the aircraft wasn't prepared. So this is the flight instructing community not doing their job. Now, I'm part of the new group called AFS 970. It's went to the national office. The reason being the FSDOs, a management specialist, usually is only assigned 4 examiners. That's why when they say, why can't we get more examiners in the FSDO, they can't handle that because they're so overworked, like you mentioned. Those poor guys are really overrun. So they've gone to a national office. We have 52 examiners in Orlando, of which they took 36 of us and put us under one individual. So his sole job is to oversee us. But the good thing about that, now, we are required after a check ride in the comment section of the ACRA or the DMS to put in comments about what the flight instructor did. And so now we have an opportunity to identify instructors that aren't doing their job. Then our management specialists would initiate a 709 check on that guy. So what we're hoping to do is clean up all the bad flight training that's occurring out there.
And I will just add this to what Frank said. I had several last week I couldn't do either, and it had to do with IACRA problems. It has to do with the fact that instructors are expecting their students to do their jobs. Our job as instructor is to do those applications, to help our students with their logbooks. And if we're logging the time as training time, we should be filling that out and signing it. And I'm finding that they're so sorely lacking in correct information. They aren't added up, the logbooks. And so when it comes to checking the hours that are needed, like Frank said, I can't do the test because it isn't correct. And that's going to have to be half a day to unwind that. So the test can't be given. And it's frustrating to everybody. And it's so unnecessary, and people say, well, I want to go fly. It's really not my job. As a flight instructor, it is your job. It is definitely your job. And if you feel you should be paid for it, which you should, then charge an hour, sit down, do it right, and correct those IAPRA mistakes because I can find them. And if I can find them, you can too. I know you can. I'm counting on you.
Mary, if I may add some humor to your remarks, today my applicant showed up with more instruction flight time received than total flight time.
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, where do you start?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as you'd expect, there's a lot of humor in some of the things that we see, but it's also sadness. And I know we've all spent. I mean, I've spent 2.5 hours with one applicant. We gave up on the exam because it's extremely stressful to someone, and we spent 2.5 hours simply cleaning up their logbook together.
Yeah.
And I didn't charge for that. I felt very bad for them because they'd come a long way to try to take an exam that day.
Did you bring a lot of white out?
Haha. Anyway, we have one more question, and I know we're just past 8 o'clock. So let's get to our last question here. Mary.
Yes.
Why don't you
okay.
kick this off?
All right. Well, I'm going to be short and maybe not quite sweet, but I'll give this a try. Mm-hmm. Remember, John Kennedy said, "Ask not what you can do what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Think of it this way: when you want to be a DPE, ask what you can do for the FAA, not what the FAA can do for you, because what the FAA needs is people who are competent, willing, will spend volunteer time doing things like, the FAST team was brought up. Well, heck yes. You need to be known. Everybody's got certificates. Everybody's got ratings. Everybody's got hours. Who's willing to help? Who's willing to be part of the solution? Who's willing to spend some volunteer time to, set up a meeting or whatever so that they can do their job as FAST team people? Everybody needs a friend of the FAA. And I would suggest you start with the FAST team because they are not in the in the violation side. They are in the training side. And so to get to know the people there and to volunteer for things, I volunteered to be on the ACS committee. That was 10 years now of trips to DC at my own expense. But I have had so many cool things happen out of that I should have paid them to attend. You've got to have that spirit of being part of the solution here. And then not golfing buddies per se, but for volunteers. I really believe in that. And so once they get to know you, know that you're part of the solution, know that you are a team player, and know that you do their work correctly and you're not high maintenance. That will really help when your name comes up at the top of that list because they'll know you already. That's my suggestion.
Mary. Well said.
Thank you.
Frank, did you want to add anything to that?
That was well said. We also should add that being assistant chief instructors, chief flight instructors in an examining position with some aerial operation gives you exposure. And look at how wonderful this FSDO is and how open they are and the opportunities you have to participate. We have the same thing. We have CFI seminars. You should volunteer to be a speaker. So everything you can do to help our FSDO, these guys do a great job and are overrun is the way to go. That's how I got into the system.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, I felt also that, concurring with both what you both said, it's really, even if they don't know you, do they know of you?
Right.
Are you out there? Are you volunteering? And remember, as DPEs, we're still out there. Many DPEs will go to flight schools and they'll run presentations for the CFIs to talk about exam issues. We're all on the same team. We really, really want these candidates to be safe pilots and get through their exam successfully. Believe me, it is no fun telling examinees that they weren't successful. It's not a good day for anyone. It's delightful to hand someone a new temporary certificate, and there's sadness in telling someone, even though it's very true, you need more training.
One of the things too in this question has to do with the length of time they've been on the list. And it says they've been in the wait list for a very long time. One of the things I would suggest is go back through and see the status of your application. When they changed the system, some of those applications were dropped. Make sure that you're qualified before you send it in. The people that go through those are at the head of that group. You know, they're head FAA people that are reviewing and evaluating those applications. Make sure yours will actually make it over the hump, because they might spend 5 hours and figure out you're not even qualified. And so that's taken time away from somebody that might have been. So make sure your references are up to date, make sure your hours are up to date, and that you actually qualify for this. So do yourself a favor and go back in and look at all that again.
And remember, you have to revalidate your application annually.
Thanks. Yes.
Yeah, and at a DP listening session at AirVenture last year, they pointed out when a FSDO was looking for applicants, so they go to a national center, and then when FSDO says we'd like applicants, they are sent the applications for that FSDO. They said for one FSDO, they had to go through, I think it was 16 applications to find 6 that were qualified. Because the system will accept whatever it's put in. And there's a matrix that makes it very clear what the qualifications are. Okay, and you don't have to worry about being a golf buddy, by the way. I'm not a golf buddy.
Yeah, me either. How about you, Frank?
Well, Laura, I believe we've made our 10 after. Laura has been answering questions in the background. I've been watching the questions. Laura, is there anything you'd like to add?
I know we're at our time, but there's just a